I'm actually really, really keen to see what happens.
Alex, don't pressure me, okay? Don't
You're
start.
like, that's it. No, I'm not doing it.
I'm not buying into this
Right, it's
gentle,
going to the start,
benevolent,
yeah.
affectionate pressure of yours, okay?
Welcome to Pros and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers. Brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Hello, folks and people out there, and welcome to Pros and Cons, the podcast by Precipice Fiction, where sometimes we feel like pros and sometimes we feel like cons. With me today is the wonderful Matan and Alex.
Oh, thank you. I do feel wonderful today. My name is Matan and Alex. I'm an English teacher and a writer. I also do some editing, and I'm 1/6 of Precipice Fiction.
And also we have the lovely Ali Burnham here.
Oh, hello. My name's Ali. I'm a writer of books and film. And in comics, there's comics out there. And I also do a lot of programming of creative courses, designing creative writing courses. And just, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And my name is Alex Eldridge. I've been published in a few little, writing journals and things. And I put out my own book of short horror stories a while ago. And that's the bones of it, really. Okay, so today I've wanted to do this for a little while. I wanted to discuss writing momentum and keeping writing momentum specifically. I think this is something all three of us are uniquely qualified to talk about. What we're specifically talking about is having the momentum to get from point dot where you're like, oh, I've got this great idea for a book, and we'll speak specifically about books, but we can talk about screenplays and things if you want, Ali. And then getting from that point to literally the end where you're like, cool, I have a thing that I can now either take to an editor, I can send to a beta reader, I can, I've just got a thing that I can now do something with. And I think that's something that we can all attest to having completed. So look, let's get into it. But before that, I need to find out what you guys are reading and consuming and all that good stuff. So I'll start with you, Ali.
Sure. One that I don't know if either of you have heard of. It felt like a show that once Nathan and I started watching it, we're like, oh my gosh, the whole world is sleeping on this show. So it's called Sugar, and I believe it's available on Amazon Prime. No, it's on Apple. It's on Apple. It's called
The
Sugar, and
elusive third
yes,
streaming
the one
service.
that
Yeah.
sometimes not all people have.
Yeah.
Yes. So the Apple streaming service. It's starring Colin Farrell. And this wonderful thing was happening that we're watching at the same time. We're watching watching The
Yeah.
Penguin,
Cool.
Yeah, I
and
was gonna.
he's
Yeah.
two different people across these two different shows. It was mind-bending to watch these two
Mm,
shows at the same time because you're like,
that's nuts.
how is he achieving both these extremes? Um, but the beautiful thing about Sugar is to promote it to everyone listening. I can't actually say anything about it. To tell you what I love about it would absolutely spoil what it is in every way. I just want to say it takes some incredibly bold risks that are well foreshadowed. So by episode three, like Nathan and I are turning to each other and we're like, this show's a little bit off kilter, right? Like you think, okay, so you will go and watch the trailer. Go and watch the
Okay.
trailer for Sugar, and you're like, I'm gonna sit down, and this looks like an awesome, hard-boiled, classic love letter to noir detective.
Okay.
And it's just fully immersed in that vibe and energy, and you're just like, oh, Colin Farrell narrating over the top, and you're like, yeah,
Mm.
okay, I dig this vibe. But yes, by about episode three, Nathan and I are exchanging side eyes, and we're like, there's something off kilter, right? And then so anyway, I won't say anything, but we're like guessing at what it could be. And suddenly there was this whole meta layer of enjoying the show,
Yeah.
of the something off kilter. And we were absolutely rewarded for our enthusiasm. So yes, go watch it. Go enjoy the bold choices the show makes. And that's all I can really say.
That's awesome.
It's
That
pretty
actually
cool.
reminds me really weirdly of the promo material for the game Bloodborne. It
Mm.
was sort of done as just this, oh, hey, it's gothic horror and it's spooky and there's werewolves and stuff. And then you get into it and you, about a third of the way through the game, you realize there's a whole lot of other stuff going on here. So
Yeah.
that's a fun little parallel.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, okay, well, I'll have to check out that trailer.
Even just the fact that they in no way in the advertising hinted at this
Yeah.
whole other element to this show. I'm like, we're living in the age of getting the entire plot and trailers these days.
Yeah,
The
just a real
fact that the
rug pull.
trailer was so dedicated to this is what it is, and you dive into it and you're like, yeah, sick. Yeah, no,
Awesome.
it's beautiful, good, wonderful.
That's very cool. Very keen to see that. What about you, Matam? What are you consuming?
You know, it just occurred to me that surely there's a way to monetize this section that we're doing where we're just basically giving free advertising to everybody. Like Bloodborne, Amazon. Who's thought about Amazon streaming in the last 2 years? And now Ali's just sending a bunch of random people to get a subscription.
And Apple as well.
Sorry, Apple streaming. My bad. Even worse. That's my point. Why are we doing this for free? Listen, listeners.
Give us money, Apple. Give us
Where,
money.
where the hacks?
Do not
You're right,
subscribe to anything until I set up the promo code, okay?
Matam.
Hold on.
We need a promo
Hold
code.
on to your money. I will see what I can do about this.
Suddenly we
okay?
sign in next week and Matan's just talking about romantasy nonstop. Completely different taste out of nowhere.
Okay,
As he's
well,
being
well,
bribed.
Just really loving
Well,
the Sarah J. Maas.
Speaking
all
of
of a sudden.
speaking of my ever-growing, ever-spreading, ever-shifting tastes, I'm reading this incredible book, and I was a bit scared about recommending it because, by God, I do not know how to say the name of the author.
Okay.
I'm kind of hoping you two, being eloquent readers, would help me. The book is Americana. Rings a bell? No? By
Maybe.
okay, I'll just try. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Yeah, I'm not having
No?
a crack at that.
Okay. Okay, she's an incredible Nigerian writer. Apparently quite famous recently. It came out not too long ago. Anyway, she's a terrific writer. Americana is the book of what I like is that it kind of twists the obvious immigrant story. Rather than have a Nigerian person in her story come to America, she's got an Nigerian immigrant returning to Nigeria after
cool.
spending 15 years in America.
Wow.
And the way it's presented is not, and again, I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here, but it's not as like this civilized, rich ex-immigrant coming back and fixing everything. It's the opposite. It's the ex-immigrant finding the beauty of what the home country has to offer. And at the beginning of the story, everybody's kind of crazy. They think she's crazy. Like, why would you go back? You're
right,
successful.
okay.
You're studying in Princeton. You got everything you want. You got this very, very handsome American guy who wants to marry you. Why do you keep thinking about an African country?
Yeah.
And the writing is terrific, and it hits all the spots. Yeah, highly recommended. And Madame Author, if you ever listen to this, I really apologize for butchering your name.
I looked it up, but I think you did an okay job for a run up and a jump at that one. So yeah.
Yeah, that almost sounds like it's like almost like an anti-white savior story. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
yeah.
It's just like, hey, this is what it would be like if we just returned to the thing. That's cool. I like that. Okay, cool. And I've been looking at when you just get into an author and you really kind of deep dive into them and read one book and you're like, I've got to get some more of this, and then you like get another one and you're like, oh wow, I'm in too deep now.
I'll get the Stephen King counter running.
It's not Mr. King actually. It's a guy called Adam Neville. I keep wanting to say Aaron Neville. I don't know why. And I spoke about his work last time, The Ritual, which was a really good, really tight thriller about some guys who get lost in the woods. Spooky stuff happens. It goes a little bit left the field in the middle, but it's pretty straight down the middle. But this one I'm reading now, Apartment 16, I'm listening to it as an audiobook, is like dual narrator, and it's like a take on the haunted house thing, but there's just very unsettling, which is what you want and expect of a horror book. But it kind of, I'm on this constant quixotic quest to find the more horrific horror stuff, and not necessarily like, blood and guts, but more like just unsettling and mind bending. And I think this is the next stage of that.
Found the next flavor you
Yes,
wanted.
and that makes me very happy.
In your palate.
Yes, exactly. Just being like, yes, this is giving me the Lovecraft without the Lovecraft. You know, it's very
nice.
good. It's very, very good. Much, yes, it's deeper and richer than the first novel, I think. So, yeah, and the guy is lovely as well. I sort of I made a post on a Facebook group that I'm in, a horror books group, just saying like how much I love this novel, and he responded to me and was like, "Hey, thank you. A lot of people think this book is shit.
Really?
So thank you for saying it's good." It is good.
So either you're both wrong, or
yeah, exactly. No, but it's he's
did you pull the I'm also an author, or you didn't?
Oh yeah, very much so. In my post, I did a bit of like, would that I were able to maintain the same level of finesse and gravitas that he can do in my writings.
Elegant.
I just googled him. He has a book called The Cries from the Crypt.
Yes,
that's a creepy name.
Yes, he's been writing for a while. I think maybe 20
iterations. Cries, Crypt.
Cries from the Crypt. Lovely. Okay. All right. So let's get into the meat of this episode here. The way I wanted to sort of structure this is in two sort of different modes. So the first thing is for people who kind of can't start or sort of restart their writing. So people who are like, look, I've got this idea. I want to get started and I really want to dig into it, but I'm just either afraid or got a block, or like I'm struggling to get this going, or hey, maybe I've done this for a while and I've kind of taken a few months off and now I'm really struggling to find my way back in. There's a whole bunch of sort of tips and things I've got through that. So I'll go through each of these and then I'll kind of open it up to discussion, and you guys can argue with me, or give me your own versions of these. And the other one is if you're stuck, if you're like, hey, I'm writing something and suddenly I've hit this wall, like what do I do? It happens to all of us, we call it writer's block or a plot impasse, or anything you like. So that's how I kind of wanted to structure this. Anyway, so let's look into our basics first. So the first thing I'd like to say that is all of these tips will not be for everyone. A lot of them may actually be traps if you kind of apply them the wrong way and you try and do it and you just keep bashing your head against that wall. It really won't work for everyone. Ali and Matan will tell you that there's a million different kinds of writers. I think even among us, we're all pretty disparate in the way that we write. So if you try and do one of these and it doesn't really work out for you, that's okay. You just have to find what sort of works for you. The second thing I'd say, just in terms of basics, is consistency is your friend. Here we go. I'm mentioning Stephen King. Stephen King says that, hey, when you start writing, you can give yourself a day off, but don't do more than that because you'll start to lose the thread, lose the plot a little bit. I don't know how this works in the same way for planners. That's certainly the case for pantsers, for people who discovery writers, to be a little bit more pretentious. So that's the first little thing here. Let me just bring this back up because it's okay. Try and make sure when you're writing that you just keep going, even if it's just maybe a couple hundred words, a day. Mm-hmm. That's fine. So the other thing is a few more little things here. You'll usually get a grace period when you start writing. You usually get a bit of a jump start. For me, when I'm writing books, novels, it tends to be between 15 and 20,000 words, where I just get them free and I don't really have to dig into them too hard.
Free trial to words.
Did you just say? Did you just say 20,000 words for free?
Yeah. If I'm writing something that's going to ball out at about 80,000, I'll get about a quarter
Alex,
of that.
That's not free. That's not a jump. That's a time warp.
Fair enough. And
look, sounds like, where do I sign up?
That's like 5 months of my life.
Do you guys? This is probably a good part to jump into it. Do you guys find that you get a bit of like hey, the iron is hot. We're really getting through it. You don't have as many of those murky days where you're like, oh god, it's sludge. I hate it.
It's project to project for me, in that I would struggle to put a number on it. At this point in the story, I'll fall off the wagon. Some stories I can get to the halfway point before I feel like I've got to change the gears and come at it with a new strategy because I've lost the initial momentum. Other stories, it could be like page 2. And I'm like, oh no.
That certainly happened. I've certainly got that. Yeah.
That's as much steam as that one had. But if I still
all right, it's on you, kid.
Then I have to come back to it in a different way. So it's I know what you mean by grace period, in that
Yeah,
some of it you get really easily, but it's
it depends. Yeah,
completely depends on the
that's
different
fair. That's
idea.
very fair.
Yeah.
You know, my gym teacher, when trying to encourage us to finish the 2,000 meters sprint or dash or whatever you want to call it, he used to say, start as fast as you can and just raise the speed as you go.
Oh.
Mm.
So I'll describe this effort as it starts hard and it gets harder. It
Yay,
doesn't
That's
writing.
fair.
start easy,
That's
okay?
fair. Okay.
No, I
Yeah.
did say I'm going to put my positive hat. Like to be subjective, just in Matan experience, is that it will happen to me in the planning phase that things would just roll off and I
Okay.
would write,
Mm.
pages upon pages upon pages of synopsis or world building.
Mm.
But the actual putting down the blocks usually happens in small chunks for me right from the start.
Sure. Yeah, okay. That's fair. And it should be said as well, like those 20,000 words that I get, 15 to 20,000, they may not all or even half appear in the book. So it's not like I really get them free. It's just like, hey, here's a little taster, and you might have to go and delete all of it later. Not delete. I would never delete, but I might put it in a separate file that doesn't get used. So yeah, your mileage may vary. Let's say that. Okay. And then look, the final basic tip, this covers everyone, is look, read good books in your genre for inspiration while you're writing. This is such an underrated tool. I only really started doing it recently, being like, hey, if I'm gonna be writing this sort of book, I should be reading this sort of book. Because everyone can
Yep.
think of a time when they've, been reading and they've been reading a really, they've been writing something and they've been on fire, and then they finished maybe the thing that inspired them to do that, and then they get onto another book which is equally great, but is in a different genre, and suddenly a little bit of crime fiction is creeping into the story there, and it's like that's okay if you want to kind of do that and you plan to do that, but
It
you know
doesn't
you,
affect you.
you don't want to let the fridge smell
Yeah.
to the food of your stories. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting, because I a very early tutor of mine recommended reading outside of genre
Fair
when
enough.
working on my thing, and my knee-jerk reaction was, that sounds like a bad idea at the time I heard it, because I agree with you, Alex. When I am deeply submerged in something, I love reaching for things that remind me of what I'm doing, will motivate me.
Mm.
I can witness how an author does something, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's how you can approach that. That's how you can crack that. Because I've been learning more and more about poetry, just through my job, the way I learned on poetry then, as if it was a slur. But I've been learning more about it, and it's such a common and done thing in the world of poetry that if a poet is working on their new collection,
Yep.
they will decide, I am picking this other poet and this voice, and I will consume nothing but
Oh,
that voice,
wow.
and all my poetry will just be a in the moment knee-jerk reaction. So that it's
That's
very much about feeding
crazy.
in and putting out as poetry, and they will acknowledge it. It's very,
Yeah,
just because it's such a
that's
done
amazing.
thing, they'll be like, this poem, and then they'll say after, and then they'll kind of acknowledge the poet that they were feeding themselves within. So they're like, if
Wow.
my poem comes out in the style of such and such, it's because
Yeah.
you acknowledge with the after that's what you were feeding yourself. So
Right. I did not know that was just like, yep, we're doing it like this. It's
it's
gonna
a
be like this
completely
guy.
done thing, and
That's
that's quite
amazing.
eye-opening as a tool, that we can do that so
Mm.
intentionally, that, oh, I want to completely be absorbing this as I'm outputting that. At the same
Yeah.
time, I think reading wide was really good to do in the gaps between drafts.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
that if I'm getting too stuck in a world, in a tone, in a genre, and suddenly your whole world it shrinks a little bit, especially that can happen in spec fic after a while.
Yeah.
Kind of say if you're taking that breather a few months between drafts, that's kind of the time to go out, remind yourself of all the different tools out there, all the different styles.
Yeah.
And if you just
Refresher.
happen to discover something amazing, then all the best. But then, yeah, being very deliberate about what's coming in when you're in the thick of it.
Yeah,
and
it's
intentional.
like what is it, like trash in, trash out, garbage in, is it GABA? Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. And while I'm not suggesting that anything that isn't your genre is garbage, because that's silly, you want to be focusing, you want to make
Yes.
sure you're getting the right flavor, and also I think you want to make sure that you are consuming the best of what you like, so you can remind yourself no, this is what I'm striving for. It's
Yes.
not like, why am I even doing this? I don't even like this stuff. It's like, no, you do. You're reading something. That's good. What do you think, Matan?
I tend to agree that reading the genre you want to write is great. Um, but I think that in general it is important to read widely, especially because I think some of the best authors, like the book I gave you way back when, the Twisted Ones by
Yeah, I still
Kim
got that.
Fisher. So she's a famous children's author who suddenly decided to jump into horror, and I think that that really rounded up her abilities as a writer. The fact that she wasn't just one thing, and maybe children's author, because they're in the point of view of the child, they kind of have that extra oomph for horror, knowing how that feels. So I do agree that you got to be careful. Like, you don't want to read a lot of things that would, because let me put the marketing cap for a second. If you're reading a Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and it's a masterpiece of the English language and everything, that's not the kind of language you want in basic science fiction. You don't want that. That's not the audience. You want it to sound more like The Martian. You want it to be more, or other authors. But you kind of got to be careful because, look, sometimes I would go like into a Sanderson, rabbit hole, and suddenly my characters would say "blood of my ancestors," and I'd be like, "Wait, you can't say that legally. You legally cannot say that. That's something that's said in the Stormlight archives."
Okay.
But it just really sinks in.
Yeah.
Like, Ali, did you ever hit your toe on the side of a table and said, "Oh, storm this"?
Storms.
No?
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
It's tempting.
Okay. Especially when the book is when you read a lot of the same guy. So, how about I'll give
You
like
know
my
what my
mixed.
replacement swear word is in my fantasy.
What is? Oh yeah, I think so. Which, yeah, I think the mixed answer would be read in your genre, but try not to do what Ali mentioned about the poetry. Don't read the same person. Read a bit of Sanderson. Maybe go back to your roots. Read Rothfuss,
Read something
Martin. Maybe go
comforting
back
too.
to Harry Potter. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but mix it up a bit so you can create your own voice that's influenced by a lot of things.
Yeah.
Because if your voice is influenced by one thing, I'm not sure that's ideal.
Yeah, no, I like that. I guess it's just being very intentional and know why you're doing it and what you're
Yeah.
doing. It's an
Yeah.
extra tool to pick up.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing. Know why you're doing it and what, because you can take different elements of someone's voice. So, for example, the book I'm writing right now, there's kind of four different narrators, four different characters going through it, and it's very, because you've got four characters. There's not a lot of room for character growth, because you keep cycling between these things. So there's a bit, but like so. I'm basing that on this very zoomed in perspective of like day by day, minute by minute, from Scott Smith, this book called The Ruins. But then also there's another element of like, well, okay, maybe I'm going to focus on one person doing a certain thing, so I might take a different narrative element or a spoken element, like a dialogue element from something else, and bring that in. So you can pick and choose. Anyway, I think we've sort of covered that. So let's get into the meat of it. What to do if you can't get started or really restart yourself. So this is if you're maybe a first-time author and you've got an idea for a book, and you sort of want to get into it, or maybe if you've if you've had a crack at it and you have kind of lost a bit of speed and you want to get back into it. First off, I'd say if this is your first time and you've never written anything else, I would probably just encourage you to write some short stories before you dive into a novel. That would be a personal suggestion for me. It's
definitely the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Baby Ali, and if she had heard that advice, she would have ignored you. But that's
course.
because I had to learn the hard way. I had to write a novel first and then be like, oh wow, that was not good, and there's still a long way to go. Maybe short stories are a good skill.
Yeah.
So yes, if you're all the Baby Alis out there that are like, I don't want to learn short story, no, please do. It's such an important tool, and it'll improve every part of your long form novel.
It really will. It really will. But I'd say kind of a more important thing for me personally, and you guys may disagree with this, is that you have no right to judge the caliber of a story or book or whatever it is. We're specifically talking about long form, but this can apply to anything. You have no right to judge it until you've finished at least one pass of it. You just don't have the perspective.
Oh,
What do you mean?
even then, I would
Well,
be gentler
exactly.
than that.
No, no, I agree with Alex.
Yeah.
I agree with Alex. It's just my
That's
knee-jerk reaction
the
because all I
bare
do is
minimum.
judge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with you. I agree with you
You judge
absolutely.
too hard.
They're totally antithetical and antithetical. Yeah, antithetical to different to the way you sort of write. So as a pantser, like if you start judging as you do stuff, speaking as a pantser, if you start judging as you're writing, it'll kill you dead in the water. Absolutely.
No, he's right.
Absolutely. So
Listen to
that's that would be the first thing I had to say for that. Now, as planners, because you guys are both mostly planners,
Yes,
may be
I have something.
a little different. So please, Matan.
I do have something. Okay. As a planner, I just wanted to say that. Okay.
Speaking as a planner.
Listen. All right. This really works. It works for me. It worked like a charm. First, I got to credit. I'll start by saying there are a lot of writing
Firstly, I got
books.
published.
No. Look,
And then writing was easy forever.
In a way, I have been, but not the big thing. Anyway, listen. My point is this: you can see I'm kind of
Benjamin buttoned your way into writing. It was excellent.
Listeners,
Go on.
not all the writing books are great. Some of them are flawed, but there is one that gave me this idea that really worked for me. So the name of the book is The Snowflake Method. It's written by Randy Ingmerson. If you just Google Snowflake Method, you'll find it. Again, us giving free advertising. Let's go. I'm not commenting on the book as a whole, mostly because I read it many years ago and I just don't remember how good it is. But the method works like a charm. And here's how it goes. Start by writing the book you imagine as a sentence. The whole book in a sentence. What you can't fit in a sentence doesn't go in. Follow that up by writing that book as a paragraph. It's okay if your paragraph is different than the sentence, if things have changed. Don't touch the sentence. Leave it as it was. Then write it as 4 paragraphs. The whole thing, just tell it. What's happening? What's happening to who? And then the final version is write your book in as many pages as you need to just tell the story to yourself. Just what's happening in your book. Don't try to make it pretty. If your voice leaks into it, huzzah. But that's not the point. Just write what happens. As you're writing, the process, naturally, things will change. Maybe the character changed from the sentence to the paragraph. Maybe the ending changed. Maybe characters that you didn't think about have suddenly popped up in the 4-page version. And then you have like this process and things that maybe they stay the same. Maybe you envisioned it correctly. But the point is, now try to write your book in a sentence again. You're not deleting the original sentence you wrote. You're just trying again, what is my book about? Now that I wrote 4 pages, in a sentence, what is my book about? And to me as a planner, that worked really well. It usually works for me in short stories too, that I kind of try to really ask myself, what is my book about? And as I kind of expand and what's the opposite of expand? Squeeze it back in and shrink it, I kind of discover what I like and what I don't like. Like sometimes something would look cool in the paragraph, but in the 4 paragraphs, I'm like, is it really interesting? And that process for me really helps prime me to actually start writing. And by the time I actually start writing, I kind of have a very clear idea what I want to write. And it usually, and by the way, sometimes your final product would be very different than what came out. But for me, it works like a charm.
Doing those exercises are so fascinating. I don't know if I've ever, I think uni burned me out of doing it that way. They're like, you've got to write a log line and a synopsis before you start writing. So for even me as a planner, doing that exercise is, I think because I find log lines and synopses technical documents and they kill the creativity a little bit. But I recently had to do a blurb for The Swallow, and having done it on the other side of worked on it for so long, then I distilled it into like 400 words and I'm like, oh, that's what the book's about. And that's just a fun discovery as I'm kind of gearing up to do like a final pass of it. Having the knowledge of doing the synopsis then was kind of the right time to do it, and was just a very useful tool. So I find that interesting that works for you, Matan. I even though I also identify as a planner, I don't necessarily start with those short.
It just gets me excited about it. I can explain
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It
Tell you
gets me
what,
excited.
I can definitely identify with that. The first step there, writing the sentence, being like, "Hey, what's your book about?" In a sentence. Love that. Love that. I just have that, and then that's there, and then
I just get carried away, I suppose.
kind of. Oh no, it's well.
So I have this other book that says what my book is about. It's a bit longer than the book. But...
just a bit, just a couple levels. Yeah, but no, but it's interesting the different like levels of like planner or pantsership. You know, like just like no, I just need the one line. That's fine. And then you're like, oh,
do you want me to talk about the flowcharts? Like, I can also talk about the flowcharts. If that's no, never mind.
No, we have to move on. Okay. I would love to see them, but
the flowchart will be an appendix to the podcast.
Great. Yes, can't wait to it. Okay. Now, the next little tip I want to give is actually a tip that I gave to you, Matan, a while ago, and you said it helped you quite a bit. So I use this every time now before I start. I remember we were having a conversation. We were sitting at a cafe in Newtown, and you were like, you know, sometimes I just find it hard to sort of get started because I'm like, well, you know, this scene's really good, and what if I jump into it and it's all like, you know, I've lost sort of the flow of it, and like it's kind of clunky and stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, what I do, and this is just something I sort of did naturally. It's just for whatever reason, my brain was just like, oh yeah, that's just how you do it. But it does seem to be quite effective for at least me. What you do is I like to write to a timer. So I'll write for an hour these days if I can and have that going. What I'll do is the first 15 minutes of that will be a run-up. It'll be me rereading the last maybe 3 pages of stuff. So I'll give myself about 15 minutes or so, you know, and what that does is, and I'll edit as I go too. I'm not just reading it. if something needs editing, I'll sort of jump
because it's yesterday's stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yesterday's
exactly.
Alex.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I'll be like, I don't know about that. But most of the time, like, oh yeah,
who wrote this?
Yeah, it's like, what is this? What is this tripe? So that can be a very effective way of just getting yourself back in the zone, right? Now, I will say, there is a trap here. I told you there'd be traps. I said there'd be traps. And you have activated my trap card.
Trap cards.
Yeah, you go, baby. So if you are the sort of person who likes to go back and polish and make sure things are perfect and kind of go, hey, I'm just going to make sure things fine. You might find yourself agonizing over that. So yeah, you've got to find.
I wasn't waiting for my name to drop.
Not naming names.
I kind of appreciate the fact that you waited for it. Like,
I think Patty's got
the advice really worked like a charm.
You've got the gold medal.
The advice worked like a charm, but I remember one time in Newtown, Alex. Newtown Cafe was great. Is it still open?
Right.
That had the pesto scrambled eggs. Anyway, one day we're sitting there and I'm going like, Alex, so I just started over my book, and you looked at me like, what? And how many words did you get into? I'm like, 30,000. And I'm just starting over the whole thing. Yeah, I don't remember your reaction. I think you were very gentle. Whatever your reaction might have been internally, like on the outside, you were very.
I mean, look, I'm not opposed to that now. Like, I can see the value in that. And remember, at the time, I hadn't even written a book, so I'd never gotten through the whole book. So, like, I can understand the idea of doing that now. It would be a lot, but yeah. Well, what do you think of that,
Ali, let's pull you into the pit.
Into the fray.
Yeah.
Let's drag you down with us.
What's the question?
What are
you talking
What's
about?
the most rewriting you've ever done? Is this relevant to the topic? I don't know, but I want to know.
Oh my god, most rewriting I've ever done.
I'm just sitting here taking friendly fire by myself.
No, look, Unsound was 30 drafts before Loft
30?
for shooting. Yellow Wallpaper's gonna be. I'm gonna be doing draft 7 start of next year, which is better because if I can come in at under 15 drafts for Yellow Wallpaper, that means I've doubled my efficiency.
Yeah,
that's how math works.
That's a net win.
Yeah. A glass half full, a glass third full.
Or Majesty's been through the ringer, and because I've had enough time away from it, this thing has happened where I kind of want to write the whole thing again the day I come back to
Ali,
it.
I want to do that too. I want to do that
You
too.
see? It's
I
really
was
valid, isn't
thinking
it?
it this morning. I was
Look,
looking at my wife,
this is actually a
and I'm
point
like,
I
I'm
wanted
just
to
gonna
make.
rewrite Absolution from scratch.
Yeah,
That's what
let's just start again and it'll be better. No, so I
You
made this
looked at
point
me
down
like
when
I'm
I was
crazy.
planning for Alex, but this idea of being aware of your at the rate at which your taste grows and the rate at which your skill grows. And for me,
Yes.
these are two different metrics. And for me, when your skill is gonna, if you're writing every day, you're naturally you're a learn bot. You're gonna become a better and better writer. I think it was Mary Robinette had an excellent quote about, you say you're 30 years old. That means you've had 30 years at being a human. Then she asks her student, how many years have you been writing? They're like 3. And she's like, well, you've got 30 years of being a human. You've got 3 years of being a writer. Like these things are not equal. Your skill level and your taste level are at different points.
That's an
That's a very
interesting
cool
take
way
on
to-
it. Like,
Yeah, and I feel with Majesty, because I've spent 2 years away from it, like my every draft of Majesty was usually because my skill rate was growing, and I'm like, I want to do another draft to make sure, like, because that's you spotting the things you want to change, right? Your skill's growing, you're like, oh, I can edit that to make it better, better, better. But 2 years away, my taste has now changed, and I'm like, I want to hold that project up to my current taste. Sometimes it's the metric at which I use when I need to leave a project alone. If my taste outgrows it, I'm no longer interested in it, then I go, oh, that belongs in the bottom drawer forever now. But if the idea still, like Majesty is still chipping away at me, so I'm like, okay, that it's worthy of pulling out of the bottom drawer, and I will do the fresh pass to bring it up to where my taste is now, and it's like worth the work.
okay,
Yeah.
so defining the metric of taste, do you mean like this idea still has power for me and is still interesting to me on some level?
We
Is
had
that
it
what you mean?
explained to us at film school, this idea that we grow up on a palette of Scorsese films and
Sure.
Spielberg's, like the best of the best. And then we
Yeah.
sit down and make our short film and we watch it back and your heart explodes, it like bleeds in your chest because you're like, that's a pile of shit. Why is it not as good as the Scorsese? And it's like, well,
Why
one,
is this
you're
not
still
yours?
working on your skill, but it's because your taste level is like through the roof.
Right.
It's at a
yeah.
completely different level.
Also, a few $1 million in
Oh,
budget,
that too,
Yeah.
but also just in
give or
terms of,
take.
because what you're aiming for, like that's what I want to write. That's what interests me. That's what I love. So say if 2 years ago I had a love of some kind of books, those were the books I were holding to the standard I wanted to write at. 2 years later, I have fallen in love with different books, and perhaps those are the books I'm using as my benchmark to that's what I want to write to, that's what I want to achieve. So that's a moving target as
And
time goes on.
could those are we talking in terms of caliber or in terms of genre? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it like, oh, I used to like books but this good, but now I like the same?
I think it's a bit of both. It's just
okay.
where you as a human go and change. And again, somehow I'm going to end up talking about poetry again. But the wonderful thing the nature of poetry is you create it in the moment. It exists. It's a snapshot of that moment. And that's almost the beauty in which it was created and will be preserved. Yes, you'll do a few drafts on it. You'll tinker with your poem to get it as good as possible. Some poets, yes, do agonize over it for a long time. But usually they're meant to exist as that captured a feeling and emotion in the moment, and then therefore the poem has served its purpose and you move on to the next poem. Novels are something that we have to live with for years, but our tastes, what we're aiming for, what we think is, well, what is our benchmark for the work we're aiming for is going to shift over years. So it's almost a moving goalpost of our own taste, even as we're working on the same project. And that's a tricky thing to balance.
I really want to agree with everything Ali said about it. Like the taste is such an important thing, which I want to lead it to a different point, is that there's really value in what Alex said at the beginning of the podcast, which is try to do it over a short period of time consistently.
Yes.
just consistently try to make it a process that happens in a chunk, and then, like Ali said, do passes. Passes can have gaps between them, but
Yes.
Yeah.
not reaching the finish line for whatever reason makes it very hard to later reach the finish line.
Yes.
Usually, if I finish something, I finish it in time. And if I don't finish it in time, it usually becomes this Frankenstein's monster of unfinished plots and arcs that just is very hard to push something you left behind to the finish line.
Yeah.
Which is why maybe me and Ali sometimes look at massive works and say, like, I'm just gonna
I'm just going to do the
fucking
whole thing
start
again.
over.
Yeah.
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 I see. And I understand that. So I can force myself to go back to a project, and I have done it before. I was actually going to one of my points, like if you are the sort of person who can take a break and come back to it, and that's not a trap for you, which it can be, then sometimes that's good. Sometimes you just need to sit down and just be like, I've been banging my head against this wall for too long. I just need to stop this for a bit. And I have successfully done that and come back to it. And
Yeah. No,
but it is hard. It is difficult,
It is hard.
especially if your tastes are changing and you're like, oh, but I had this thing I want to do. That I feel like that's the biggest thing. Just being
Yes.
like, hey, I really want to do this other thing because I've got this idea burning right now. This idea that I've put like 50,000 words in, that doesn't seem as fun anymore. And look, I know we've all got trunks full of like 15 and 20 and 30,000 word things that we've been like, I don't want to do that anymore. And that's
Yeah.
fine. That's normal as well. But
Yeah, it is.
if you can do it and you're like, no, I believe in this. Actually, this is something I realized really recently. So I've always had this thought with people who like who will go on the same novel for a really long time and go like, no, I need to make it better. I need to get like, that's always perplexed me because I'm like, how do you know that your idea is good enough? That's always the thing for me. I'm like, how do I know this idea is good enough? And then with the novel I've had right now, I'm like, no, I like this idea for its own sake. I like it. It's a little log line. I know I can make that. I can actually go through the whole thing and write it, and I can get that done. And if it's crap, I still think I could go back and rewrite it. And that's how I know, like, no, you have to lean into this. So yeah. So I think it's knowing yourself and knowing your capacity to return to something or your stick with ability, that sort of stuff. So that's a real tricky one to sort of.
It is. And I guess I want to split hairs between noticing if it's burnout or if it's writer's block. Because for me, those are two different things, and I've gotten better at identifying them because they have different strategies with how I would deal with them. So at the moment, writing is hard for me because I have burnout. That's just a me thing. There's too many other things going on. And if I were to sit down and write at the minute, I wouldn't necessarily enjoy it in the same way. It would just become another time. Burnout is that thing where even the things you know you love, you should love, you don't love. Like that's when you know you've kind of reached that point. And the only way to deal with it is a wonderful bit of advice I was given is all you really have control over is sitting down and creating the circumstances under which creativity can happen. So you can't make creativity happen, but I do have control over, I can make space for a couple of hours. I can make myself a cup of tea. I can tell my husband to leave me alone for a couple of hours. I can sit down. I can read a book. Just all the things that can make this space for creativity to happen. And when you're suffering burnout, maybe that's as much as you need to do to start enjoying it and getting back on track and starting to recover. I like to think of it as almost like you've made like a fey circle in the middle of the forest and you're just like leaving a gift in the middle and walking away, and you just wait for it to show up, and you're just like, is it going to come today? And that gift could just be me putting it down 200 words.
But you're there, you've rocked up, you've like made the little marshmallow package that you put in the middle of the circle. It's not like you were just like, he's not coming today, like you showed up. That's the important thing.
What if it shows up and it follows you home?
That's exactly what I want.
And it's dark.
That's the win condition.
I think we have very different like fey demons that we're talking about here, Matan. You and me as horror writers.
But if it's just writer's block, as in if I'm in a healthy mental health space, writing is something I enjoy, but say it's the project that I'm just like, how do I get over this thing? That wholeheartedly want to reinforce what Alex said about just touching it every day, even a little bit. And there's something to be said for the same time every day as well, and pattern building. Like our brains are little whores for patterns. Our brains love doing the same things every day. You can just be like, oh, we're being creative at I don't know, 11 a.m. today. And the brain after a while, you give it a week, the brain shows up at 11 a.m. being like, I'm creative. And you're like, okay, over here.
Great.
It's like going to the restroom, you know, you condition yourself that it's a morning thing. Never mind.
Did you just compare writing to taking a shit, Matan?
Absolutely.
No, I can.
He's got to get it out.
I fully agree.
Well,
okay. Sorry, go on.
Just one thing that we really haven't touched, and I think personally really helps me. I feel like one of the biggest momentum boosters is to have ready readers. And I think knowing that someone is waiting to see the chunk of the week or the chunk of the month, at least for me, is tremendous. And it's not just the deadline aspect of it. It's the fact that someone will engage with what you've written. And I think that's where finding writer friends and maybe exchanging with them on a regular basis, that you know that I'm gonna get something from Ali this week. I'm gonna give something to Ali this week. Same with all of us. I feel like the most productive time of my life is where I've regularly, weekly attended the writers group, because you know that you write something that will be seen, and even forget the fact of how healthy it is for a project to be seen as it is being written by many people. I think it really helps, you know, take out a lot of your blind spots that you really want to notice in the middle and not in the end. And it makes me want to write, knowing that, you know, someone's gonna see it this week, not when it's published, not when it's done and I gotta drop a 3 kilo block on a friend's face. But it's also easier to ask people to read chunks of 2,000 words than 75 or 150 or whatever we're dealing with here. So if you can find a friend that also pursues this whole writing thing or a writing group, I find that it's amazing for momentum.
It's a good moment to mention Brandon Sanderson, because obviously he has this reputation of getting out books inhumanly quickly. And I guess just peeling back the veil on how he achieves this is he has a mechanism, a machinery of beta readers and gamma readers in place that is just kind of unheard of. So he gets through a first draft, and I feel like I know many writers who can get through a first draft at the same speed Brandon Sanderson does. He's not doing anything special there in terms of the first draft existing, but what is magically happening is his editing process. He has 3 different pools of beta readers that he will send it out to, and then so he just galvanizes an insane amount of feedback quickly. So where everyone else on the planet finishes a pass, sends it off, waits for feedback, that comes back, then they implement it. He's getting just truckloads of feedback back, and then he implements that. And it's almost the equivalent of he's turning 6 drafts into 1 process there. And then he does that all again for gamma readers. And I think he's got like 30 different pools of gamma readers. Like I just want to explode. Like, imagine how big this machine is that's actually working on each of his books. So he's just
how he integrates that feedback.
Hyper created this efficient editing pipeline that we just don't have access to.
Do we have scientific evidence that there is only one Sanderson? Has anyone proved it? You know the 3 Jokers storyline from DC a few years back?
No, there's actually 3 Jokers around.
So what if there are 3 Sandersons? What if one is like the Mistborn Sanderson, one is like the Stormlight Sanderson, and one is just like the dad, you know, the guy that actually has to deal with it.
Well, I guess that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to demythologize him a little bit, in that he's not superhuman, but he does have this framework of editing resource behind him and the speed at which he receives feedback. So, you know, even poor Georgie boy doesn't have that kind of oiled machine work.
Who's Georgie boy?
Who is Georgie boy?
Martin, right?
Yeah, George R. R. Martin.
Oh, yeah. I was trying really hard not to bring him up today.
Oh, we shouldn't kick him
out of sympathy, down. Really, out of sympathy, if anything else.
We just link him our podcast episode.
I'll probably do an Elden Ring too. It'll be fine.
Yeah, he's just over it. He's just over it. Sorry,
I
but
yeah, I feel
just over
really,
it.
I feel
My
really
my
bad for that
theory
guy.
is just the sheer rapid success and exposure and critical response has
Yeah.
just murdered that poor man's
He's got the
love
bend.
for his story.
Yeah.
Maybe not love, but just the motivation
Excitement to
he
write
needs
it.
to
Yeah.
work to write it has been
But
murdered.
it's okay, good for him. I mean, that's not a bad ending for a writer. You know, that's not
Yeah,
a
I feel like
bad
if we all
outcome.
forgot about him and people stopped asking him questions, he might actually be more creative. I think he needs to happen in the dark.
Yeah,
In
it's just
obscurity.
he's like the opposite of a plant. It's just the light kills him.
Yes.
He's like a vampire. He's a vampire.
What's that
Yeah.
particle
What if he
effect?
take-
Like wave particles
Oh,
that
yeah,
if
where-
they're
where
observed, they
if you
behave
observe,
differently.
acts
But if
differently.
you
That's-
look
Yeah.
away, then they write the winds
it's
of
gonna-
winter. So
What if he
Kill me now.
What if he fakes his own
Heisenberg effect? I
death?
think it's the Heisenberg effect. I
yeah.
think.
Fakes his
What if
own.
he
I
fakes
think
his
he
own
should
death
at this
just
point.
to-
Yeah, and then bequeath it,
And then
to
he writes it.
himself. Yeah, bequeath it to himself as a pen name and be like, "Oh, I was very close to George R. R. Martin." Like that's actually.
And then there's
genius.
like an interview, and it's George R. Martin shaved and like with,
he has
with
got the
red
cap
hair.
backwards.
Yeah, like. So how did you meet Mr. Martin?
Just shaved everything but the mustache.
Reddit.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So another one. This is a really simple one, and I've done it a few times myself. Just write somewhere different. Just go somewhere different where you haven't written
Somewhere? Oh, like physical space.
Yeah, physically go somewhere different. Oh, okay. Well, that's actually part 2 of it. Yeah. So physically, if you usually write at home, go to a cafe, take your stuff to a cafe, see if it just jigs something different. Another take on that is go to a different part of your story. Like the other day, I was writing this thing, and I was just like, I don't know where this goes. I don't know what these characters are doing anymore. And then I just went right back to the beginning and wrote basically a short story that was the prologue of it, like about these 2 guys on a Thai fishing boat. And I didn't finish it, but like I read it back and I was like, no, I like what I've written. That's fine. And that kind of just rejigged me to be like, okay, cool. I know what I'm.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
For the life of me, that's probably the most terrifying thing I
that's
could think of
crazy.
is
Wait,
trying to
elaborate. Explain. What do you mean?
Yeah, like skipping ahead and writing somewhere in the future or
Oh, I didn't say skipping ahead. I didn't say that.
You
that
jumped back.
Yeah, I went
Yeah.
back. Which is
Oh,
I couldn't go ahead. No, I'm with you on that one, Ali.
But I've heard of writers that do
No,
that. And I'm
no,
like, what's
couldn't
wrong
do
with
it.
your head?
Yeah, no,
I love that you can do that, but it's like watching a contortionist and you're like, the
hang
elbow
on.
shouldn't go there.
You're a planner, right? So you've got to what's going to happen.
That's
theoretically,
still not how
right?
it works, though. It's yes, the
That's
plot.
not
I
the
know how the
magic,
plot
Alex.
goes.
Look, Alex, I know the sun is eventually going to explode and kill us all. That doesn't mean I want to see it.
No, let me
Oh, I
try
have
and
to
explain
split
it.
that.
Say as a planner, I know how the plot's going to go, but the pacing still needs to be worked start to finish. Like that needs to be threaded out in real time. The voice needs to be threaded out in real time to
Yeah,
try and write
that's
different
fair.
sections and then just like mash them together. These puzzle pieces won't fit. Like in
Yeah, I
theory,
agree.
yes, it might be a fast way for me to get the raw words out, but it just means more work in the editing because it would. I feel like I would have to throw out so much. Maybe that's the life of a pantser, though.
I don't know, because like I said, I would never go to the future part of it. Like that's just not something I would do. But in terms of like, oh, hey, look, I'm missing this one bit. Oh, this little bit of character and like development came to me, but that actually has to happen way back there. I have no problem jumping back and just inserting that and being like, cool.
How are you so relaxed about this process? How are you so calm all the time? I'm sitting in my chair sweating when you're describing this blasphemous, like method. Like I admire you, Alex.
What do you mean? Like going back and like writing with it?
If I go back, I'm rewriting everything.
The whole thing
from
starts
that moment on.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're at the ultimate end of that where everything
I
has to
cannot be
fully
trusted to
linear
go
the
back.
whole time. Okay, yeah, right, yeah. So I told you guys there'd be traps. So yeah, you some people can't do it. Like okay, so there's definitely someone. I reckon one of us in the writers group. I think maybe Phoenix or maybe James. I reckon they could probably just be like, no, we're gonna write the end. Gonna go write the end now. Like
I think
reckon.
James is admitted to this.
Yes,
And
I think
it's
James
insane.
Admit it, like it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
crime. Right?
So that's the far end.
Lock him up.
Right? That's almost like future pacing pantser, and then there's Matan, who's the other end. Is like, if I go back, all this is going to be erased. Which
I'm
is
just hiding in my
is
Excel
insane to
sheets
me.
with a helmet. That's what I'm doing.
That's crazy. And then me and Ali are somewhere in the middle. And like,
Yeah.
could you go back and like just insert a scene, you know, where you're like, oh, that should go in there. Like maybe
Inserting scenes.
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going backwards, like just putting something in.
I wouldn't like it. It wouldn't feel natural.
Okay.
But I could do it under duress.
If you put a gun to my
Twist my arm, yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to offer another one, as you mentioned,
Please.
just writing in different locations. So something to keep me motivated during a long form project. So say, yes, I am touching it a little bit each day. I'm doing all the right things, but I'm still staring down the barrel of a several month long process, and I have to stay interested in this thing. I do a lot of like little kitsch aesthetic choices where I start to make whatever I'm writing my personality a little bit. Maybe you guys have observed this.
Oh, I get
Did
it.
you
Right.
kidnap a Royal Navy ship recently?
Oh, yes, all those mutinies I committed have something to do with it. But no, like,
think
look
the
at the
Coast
show
Guard's looking
behind
for you,
me.
Ali.
Like, you can see,
Merchant
like,
vessel.
a mini boat. And I'm like, art boats cool. And now I'm really into boats.
That is very cute.
And then I bought a hat. And my husband gifted me a sword because he knew I was into swords. And it just
Yeah,
starts,
I mean,
I like these little, I start collecting all the little treasures that are like part of this wider world that I've deeply embedded myself into. I've done it a little bit with Metropia as well, like a few like art deco, like I have this jacket that's very Metropius, and I recently saw an art deco dress, and I'm like, fuck yeah, buying that because it's just these things are now part of my outwards aesthetic, and I don't, there's a conversation with that keeps me invested in the world. And I feel like I see a lot of people do it because we have to find content for fucking Instagram and shit these days. I think a lot of it's a motivating way for people to be like, oh, my book's about this. So here's a picture about it, or here's a video about it, or some stuff like that. They just make it a part of also their digital aesthetic. So you also just I know a lot of writers who create mood boards. I've never gone too deeply into the mood board thing because after a while that just starts to feel like procrastination.
Yeah,
like
sure,
if you're spending so much time on that digital stuff, just write the book. But no, a lot of people create playlists and they create mood boards, and I think that's just part of feeding that same I'm burying myself into this world in as many different ways as possible. It's similar to the reading in the same genre almost. You're feeding the same.
Yeah. I feel like that's the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to
Ali,
embody
never
this.
write a serial killer story, okay?
No. I would go all method writing.
Well, I mean that apparently like what's his name? The guy who was he used to be Elvis, and now he was most recently in June.
Oh,
Used to
Austin
be
Butler.
Elvis? What?
Sorry, Austin Butler. He first was in Elvis, and he committed really hard to the bit of Elvis, so much that he still apparently has a bit of a Southern accent, where he didn't before. But then, like, people were like, when he did June, they were like, "You can't do that again because like we can't be around like because the guy's like a vicious murderer." So
Don't
he's
do
like,
that.
"Oh, yeah." So he'd like turn it on and off a little bit, but like that's like the like
Method writers. That's the new
method
thing.
writers. Yeah, I
Method
like the idea.
writers.
I don't really have a lot of stuff. I can't imagine myself being like, I'm gonna get the things to do that. Like, I don't know. But
I don't know, Alex.
what do you mean?
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot,
No,
but
no,
you
no,
got a
go
bit.
on.
I mean, you do have a bit of miles in you.
Oh yeah, okay, fair enough. But that's
I mean, I don't know that you've been running hit jobs or for the underworld, but
I don't have any DeLoreans, put it that way. No, but I think embodying a character is different. Like, okay, the guy I'm reading right now, it's really interesting to compare the two books because they're written quite close together, and there's this real through line of fuck London. Like, there you go.
Sorry,
Yeah,
just I
exactly.
saw another example of my little
surrounded, Alex.
But yeah, no, in that he's like there's two main sort of protagonists, and there was one actual protagonist and one of the two protagonists in the other book, and they're both like kind of down and out starving artists. Like London eats you up and spits you out, and it's a through line going through it. So I feel like that's a thing. We self mythologize a little. What's the word? Self insert, author insert. Like I think you can't help but do that a little.
Like a Harry Potter fanfic, basically.
I was thinking
Sorry,
more like
you said self-insert, and it just jumped into my head. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
I suppose so.
it's less about I don't know the self enjoyment of it. Like less about the masturbatory elements and more just, yeah, I think it is the immersion.
Staying in the world. Yeah.
And
Immersion's a
you're
good word.
feeding those senses. You're keeping yourself reminded of it. Yeah, I think it's just if you never let it out of your peripheries for too long, then you're like, oh
Yeah.
yes, and you can just sink back into the world with visual triggers or sound triggers if you're a playlist person. I think
Yeah. I like that, the idea of the playlist stuff. To wrap it up, my last point, and we've sort of covered this already, but I want to go at it again because I think it's nice and it's good. If you're getting stuck with something, talk with your writer friends about it. I've had numerous conversations with Matan, with Patty. I'm sure we've spoken about plotting stuff before, Ali.
No, I never talked to you.
Yeah,
Actually, I've hated you this whole time.
Secret grudge. Yeah. No, but it really helps just work through something. Sometimes just the act of saying it out loud, you're like, oh, well, of course that's the next thing that's going to happen. But even if not, then one of your friends might, and some people you just want to keep it all under wraps until it's done, and that's totally fair as well. But sometimes it can be good just to free up a bit in the plot or whatever, just by going, hey, so this happens and then this happens and this happens. I don't know what happens after that. And you can get a bit of that. Ali, have you ever got a bit of inspiration from sort of explaining something and someone going like, oh, how about that?
For me, it's really useful for clarifying. It's maybe I kind of throw all my pieces into the air and I can be like, I know all this happens, but like I don't know what connects them all. Like it's almost when there's too many pieces on the board, and it's the time I need to find the through line, and it's when you want to come to editing it down and making it succinct as possible.
Yeah.
I find other people's opinions really good at being like, that thing you're talking about over there has nothing to do with this through line you want to hone in on. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. So outside eyes are so good for that, for the perspective. I have too many toys. Help me find the only ones that deserve to be here to tell the best story possible.
Totally. What about you, Matan? Have you ever got like a little bit of help with the plot?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had heaps of conversations with you about like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In general, it does help to talk about your book sometimes. I would say be careful though, because talking instead of writing is addictive and easy and fun. It's a lot easier to describe your book than to actually sit down and write it. And the gratification of saying all the cool things that you planned out can, for some of us, the less disciplined of us, can kind of substitute for the actual pleasure of showing something that you wrote to someone. And I think never underestimate the value of a cold reader, if that makes sense. Someone who has no freaking clue what's going to be on the page. But absolutely, yeah, I cannot stress enough how helpful it can be in a tangled. Like I would just say to one of you guys, like, I generally don't know if this makes sense. I need you guys to like tell me what you think.
Yeah.
No, I guess I don't have that problem because I'm so bad about talking about my ideas. Every time I've tried to talk about it, and then I can just, the person's face goes blank, and I'm like, I know I'm not getting it across, and I'm like, you know what? The proper way to communicate this is if I go away and write a novel, because then the novel will have all the ideas.
It's incredible. You're so bad at talking that your writing has to like supplement it.
Well, that's why you're a writer, probably.
The superpower is I cannot describe it on the spot, that I just have to go away and write it.
The bonus content for this episode should be just like 3 minutes of Ali trying to describe one of her books.
It's the worst thing when you try and explain your book and you just see someone's eyes glazing over a period of like a minute or two, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds really cool."
Become a high school teacher. You'll get used to that.
Yeah. Wow.
Students, if you're listening, there's an exam on Tuesday, so yeah.
I do want to congratulate you, Matan. For context, for everyone's listening, he talked about the power of the cold readers to the point he is withholding all information about his Precipice novella because he's refusing to talk about it creatively to any of us because he wants us all to be cold readers. So he is preaching what he is saying to an aggressive degree. Yeah.
And I cannot wait to read that story. I'm actually really, really keen to see what happens.
Alex, don't pressure me, okay?
Like, that's it. No, I'm not doing it.
I'm not buying into this gentle, benevolent, affectionate pressure of yours, okay?
It's insidious. Okay, all right, cool. Well, that's probably it, guys. I think we've gone through a lot of stuff there. This was good. We got a lot of. I feel like we had this conversation had a lot of momentum. Huh?
Hey!
Yeah.
Whoa.
But now it comes to the end where we have to sort of wrap up. So for anyone who hasn't checked it out yet, we'd really love for you to go and have a look at the new Mythic, which is our anthology. We've all contributed to it. We all have big, beefy sort of novellas in there. I mean, I guess they're small novellas, really, but they're large short stories at least.
Mine's beefy.
Yours is a legit novella. So yeah, please, you can get that on Amazon. We also have an audiobook. The audiobook is incredible, and I'm not just saying that. It's like the acting, really the acting on the audiobook alone is amazing. Like it's all professionally acted, and it's just a really great listen. So if you prefer imbibing your content that way, definitely get into that. Also, look, if you would like to leave a 5-star, well, it doesn't have to be 5-star. I'm not allowed to ask for that. But if you'd like to leave a review.
No, guys, 5 stars. Alex, what do you think? 5 stars.
No, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to request that.
No, 5 stars. Please, Mr. Listener.
A review for us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever the heck you listen to your podcast. Please do that.
Two-way radio in a bunker somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And having said that, Ali, what are the pros of keeping momentum over a long-form project?
Pros are bragging rights over your other writer friends. You can laud it. Other pros, you will get a book at some point out of putting words down, and that's dirty. Amazing. Those are the 2 pros of keeping momentum.
Incredible. Love that. Okay. And Matan, what are the cons of keeping writing momentum over a long-form project?
The agony of failure will enrichen your writing voice.
Is that a con? No, that's good. That's good.
It's the con of having momentum, because if you write too fast, you're missing out on all the pain.
Yeah, true enough.
The pain's why we're in it.
Yeah, the agony of failure to keep the momentum will make you a better writer. Just read Kafka.
So you're just skipping over that. Okay, cool. Well, that's been good, guys. That's all from us, and we will see you on the next episode, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.